Welcome to Season 7 of True Blue Conversations with your host, Adam Bloom. Real talk with those who pledge to keep us safe with grit, sacrifice and determination. Let's get on with the show. This episode of True Blue Conversations is proudly brought to you by Loudon Private Wealth, the team trusted by professionals, veterans and families across Australia to build real long-term financial security. If you want to take control of your finances, protect your future and build real generational wealth, Loudon Private Wealth are the people you want in your corner. They don't do gimmicks, they don't do hype, just smart strategy and honest advice coupled with real-world experience. Check out the links in the description to contact Warren and the team via loudonpw.com.au or 02 8313 0418. Now let's get back to the show. This episode of True Blue Conversations was brought to you by Dead Reckoning Rum, creating individual rum releases commemorating the diggers lost in Afghanistan, proudly supporting veterans, donating 50% of all their profits to veterans organisations around Australia. Look up Dead Reckoning Rum, buy some bottles, connect via Instagram and Facebook and give them your support. Now, let's get back to the show.
G'day, welcome back to True Blue. Today, I want to thank my good friend, Matty Bryant from Soaring Eagle Productions for filming this very special podcast, being the 150th episode of True Blue. Wow, who would have thought 150 episodes? So thank you to Matt. And I want to thank every veteran and every first responder for your service to our nation. It is deeply appreciated. Today, I'm coming to you live from Kirribilli House in Sydney, and I have a very, very special guest joining me for the 150th episode. I'm joined by Her Excellency, the Honourable Miss Sam Mostyn, AC, the 28th and current Governor-General of Australia. And Sam has joined us today to talk about her life before becoming the Governor-General and what the Governor-General's role actually is, because there's a lot of Australians that actually don't know what the Governor-General's role is. So it's a perfect opportunity to have her on and share her story. So Sam, welcome to the podcast.
It's lovely to be here joining you.
It's great and absolutely an honour to have you on. So Sam, before we get into you being the Governor-General, talk me through life before, like growing up, and how did you get to be in such a place of, and where does your commitment to service come from?
It's a good question, because there was a very long and different life for me before I became Australia's Governor-General. I think service, you pointed to service as your main part of that question. I am the daughter of a veteran, a daughter of a man who served in the Australian Army for almost 40 years, and I'm the oldest of four girls. So as a family, we were a service family. My mum was more than just an army wife. She was the glue that held everything together, and my mum and dad's relationship was such a beautiful love story, but also one of service to each other and to us as a family. And so I guess when you grew up in a family where your dad's job is serving the country, my dad always, when I said, how do you describe what you do? He said, well, I serve Queen and country. It was foundational for him. He went and joined the army at RMC Duntroon in the 1950s as a young man. And my mum, who had studied in Adelaide and grown up in Adelaide, and they met at a library in Salisbury where my dad was borrowing a book while he was studying there. They just both had a very similar view about contribution to community, always being involved in the school PNCs, the school fetes. So anything that meant people showing up and being part of a neighbourhood or a community, as well as understanding that what my dad was doing was serving the country, and that we were all sort of in service of that, because there's a price that is paid by service families, probably in a different way back then in the 60s, 70s and 80s, because there really wasn't a lot of focus on defence housing or veteran support. It was a different world. So the family, we were an army family. And so that had implications for all of us. And I guess as an oldest child, I was a bit of a sensible kid. Well, one of my sisters has an intellectual disability, and so we also spent a lot of time in the disability community. And my dad and mum always had causes in addition to things. They were involved in the anti-smoking for health campaigns. They were part of the Natural Health Society for a while. They were always involved in community activities wherever we lived. And so I think those foundational impacts and influences for me
Rubbed off.
really did rub off. And I remember them both behaving in a way and telling us that you never judge anybody. You meet everybody on their own terms. No one is more important than anyone else. But within that, because of my dad's service, he understood rank and respect. And so it was always about showing up. And, he used to say, always be on time, have shiny shoes, do the recce, always be prepared for things that you're invited to, those kinds of things. So there was a bit of a military type of thing to it. But at the heart of it was just treat people with kindness. Everyone's part of a community. And I think those formation days for me carried through. And then everything I did, I was fortunate enough to study law. It was a great foundational degree for me at the ANU. I worked for the Chief Magistrate then, Ron Carl. It was my first job really as a young adult. So I got to work in the Magistrates Court while I was studying for my degree. I got to see what happens in those local courts and what happens in community. It was a really good face-to-face. It took my law degree from being, I guess, theoretical to very practical before I'd even graduated. And then I worked over my career for some remarkable people. Michael Kirby, who just was always about justice and love and community and the place of the law. I was a lawyer for a long time and then a policy advisor. And my career sort of morphed around many things until I came to this role. But always applying those principles of community, respect, always treating people with respect and never prejudging. Looking out for those on the margins, I guess, having had disability in our family, knowing that there was always someone who you had to look out for, who was not at a table where you were deciding things. And then I had the most remarkable and lucky career in the corporate world, both here in Australia and overseas. And along the way, I let my curiosity take me into a different form of service to my parents, which was serving on not-for-profit boards, serving on things like the National Mental Health Commission when it was first created, working with Beyond Blue, Foundation for Young Australians. So I always kept on the side or working with me, with my corporate life, community engagement and generally through governance and in volunteering. And through that, I think that's why the Prime Minister in the end thought I might make a reasonable Governor General, because I had a broad range of skills that I'd done over many, many different industries and a lot in sport and local community, Indigenous affairs, women, young people, mental health. So very, very fortunate start with such a beautiful, loving family with lots of teaching going on early and then navigating my way, but always with a bit of curiosity and taking some risks along the way.
Well, you mentioned Beyond Blue. It's a cause close to my heart as I'm a volunteer speaker for Beyond Blue.
Yeah.
And the work that Beyond Blue does is amazing. And for you, why is mental health advocacy so important to you, and why do you have the baton to really put people to say, let's talk about mental health?
Well, first of all, thank you for being one of the speakers on behalf of Beyond Blue. Whenever I went to meet those that had lived experience and were the speakers, I was always completely overwhelmed with the generosity and kindness and the bravery of all of you turning up in audiences and actually talking about your own circumstances, and that there are paths and organisations that can help, and removing stigma and making it a conversation that everyone can be part of. So thank you. That's a very big part of Beyond Blue's work, and was one of my favourite visits always as a board member. It matters to me because I always try to think about what makes a healthy society, what makes a great, strong community. And as I was growing up, there was such a stigma. No one would talk about mental health. We didn't have the language. We didn't have the support with organisations. It was always kept within families. And I come from an era where I think there were mental health crises in almost every family that I knew, through school, through my parents. We just didn't talk about it. There were other words used occasionally, not very nice words about people. My father came back from Vietnam after serving for a year, so I got to see the Defence Force and people who are coming back from service in the way that those others did in earlier times with those coming back from other theatres of war. But Vietnam was a very difficult time for many of those that came back and contested, and there were protests. And those, my dad didn't see active service, but for those who did, to come back to a country that didn't know how to even say thank you, I think, so I was conscious of that. But most importantly, I think every family is touched by mental health, whether we understand it or can say, but I think almost every family could point to someone they know who's experienced suicide in their family, and someone who's taken their life, or someone who's currently struggling. And so when I was on the Mental Health Commission in its very earliest days, we tried to frame a conversation from those with lived experience from right across the country to say, what are we really trying to do here? And we said, rather than talking about mental health, why wouldn't we judge a country based on its mental wealth? Can we judge the wealth, the community wealth of a country by how well it's doing with the way it manages and supports those with mental health challenges, and not just talk about mental ill health or people who are ill, but look at this as a way of framing a much better Australia and understanding that what was those pathways, and really backing in those great professionals and organisations that were destigmatising and encouraging people to come forward and talk for the first time. So I think I had very early signals. I worked in many corporations where if I looked around at the workplace, you could always see when people were having a tough time and couldn't bring their full selves to work, or were managing crises in their families, and again, couldn't tell you about it because it was embarrassing or seemed to be failure. So my interest really springs from knowing that within generations of my family, there had always been mental health issues around, just as there were with every family. And then trying to think, what role could I play, seeing it in the various organisations and enterprises I've been part of, to say, let's get better. And I met so many of the great advocates who were bringing things forth and creating things like Headspace and the Origin Network and Beyond Blue and Black Dog. And so I was part of that time when we were putting time and money and thought into a national plan for our mental wealth and our mental health. And for me, it just became the underpinning of so much else that I'd done, because wherever I went, there was always a story that was going to be benefiting from us becoming much more proficient and kind about how we think about those that have mental health challenges.
And going forward, what do you think leaders and public institutions play in the role of breaking that stigma down? Because there still is a stigma. It's gotten better in the years since I've been with Beyond Blue, and education around mental health and the wording of they committed suicide. We don't use that word. It's not a crime they chose to end their life. What more do you think leaders play in moving forward to keep breaking that stigma down?
Well, I think we find and have to give and demonstrate leadership at all levels. So leadership is not just hierarchical. Leaders in our community are at all levels, and leaders appear all the time, like you, doing your podcast and actually taking these stories. That's an act of leadership. And so I think those that are in positional powers of leadership, I think there's a great opportunity for them to talk about their own experiences or family experiences, and not be frightened, not try to cover things, understand the language. You're right. We use language too casually. It's not a crime. People get to a point where they, in extreme circumstances, may choose to take their lives, and it's catastrophic for everyone. The ripple effects over years and years is so profound. I'm also a patron of Lifeline, and I know that the work that Lifeline does in explaining what it is that those Lifeline counsellors are doing and those that take the calls are doing, and helping people see a way through. So the more we can talk about the fact that there are mechanisms, there are supports for those that really do need to engage, I think is important. But I think the more any of us do is just talk and listen.
Exactly.
And listen and be very empathetic. And if you don't have a lived experience, always sit with someone to understand. Don't judge.
I'm glad you said that.
Never judge.
Never judge someone.
Never judge someone, and never think you're in their shoes. I never, ever assume I can understand what are the personal circumstances of anyone I meet, because all of our lives, our relationships, our families, whether we've served, whatever our jobs are, however we are financially, whatever's happening in our lives, that's our unique set of circumstances. And so I think all leaders at all levels are going to be caring, always be kind. So I put kindness and care and respect at the centre of my entire role as Governor General. But listen more than talk. Don't judge. And when people ask for help, then have in your kit bag an understanding of what is available. So educate, understand what are the services and people that are actually doing the work. And so if someone is in extreme need, you can at least offer something without offering how to help them where they might seek some sort of support. So, but leaders of all levels talk, listen, understand, and if you have any power of advocacy, engage, volunteer. Think about a personal engagement with the mental health sector, and pay attention and do things like this. Listen to your podcast.
Yeah, that's right. And you're a lover of sport, and you were the first female women's AFL commissioner. And before we talk about that, who do you support in AFL?
Oh, Sydney Swans.
Oh, yeah, I love
Men's
it.
and-
You're the best. Yeah. So away from being Governor General, do we see you at the footy with a pie and a beer, or what?
Probably not so much beer, but pies.
Yeah.
So I was just at the Swans game
Yes,
last week.
Good win. Yeah.
First game of the season.
Of course.
Got out there and 63-point win over the Blues.
Yes.
I was very happy to be back at the SCG.
Yeah,
and I think there is a link to mental health through this, because sport also taught me that we have huge expectations as a country that's sports mad, that our sports leaders and our sports heroes aren't weak. And we've seen that right across sport, and every sport I've been involved with. Once you get into the sport, you know that there are many things that our sportsmen and women carry. Many of them start with very difficult circumstances. Many have to take time off, and they often can't say what it is. So you get these funny sort of needs time away. Increasingly, there are many of those athletes who say exactly what it is and how they're suffering. But the pressure that we put on our sportsmen and women at the highest level, the pressure we put on kids, to perform at a high level, at junior levels. I'm really conscious of that. The sport is both one of our great connectors, but it's also one of our great opportunities to destigmatise. And I've seen that in footy. I've seen in many cases, young men who have such pressure, who haven't known how to talk, and now feel that they can without that being embarrassing or seen to be weak. And so it's another good example. And at the Swans have, I don't know if I'm allowed to sort of semi-swear.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Little bit.
You can. Yeah, you can.
One of the many things.
You're the Governor General. You can do what you want.
There are many, many things about the Swans that I love, but there has been a fundamental value through the entirety of the Swans build when they came to Sydney. And it's called the No Dickheads policy. And the reason it said that no one in the club could behave in a way that would offend anyone, and that every member of the club could call someone else's bad behaviour, no matter if they're the most junior person and the person behaving badly was at the very top. So it changed the whole nature of, I have to keep silent when someone senior is saying something, or if it's a player to a coach. So this policy, I won't keep calling it, but it pervades it's about being everyone having a voice. No one behaving badly, no one's above anybody else. And if someone does behave badly, there's consequences if someone calls it. And I think in part that's also brings us to, if someone's not doing so well, they're wrapped in care. And I think the best places do that very, very well.
Absolutely. And so it leads me to you being the first women's AFL commissioner and really getting the women's game off the ground. And has it been, to sit back now and see where the women's game is, has that been so rewarding to see when the girls first came in and when you were commissioner?
So I joined the AFL Commission in 2005, first woman to join that commission since its inception. And not everyone was happy about that because it was a direct appointment. And so I had to deal with the criticism about what did I bring to the commission. The then chair of the commission was quite clear that with half the fan base being women, all the mums, all of the partners, everyone was invested in this game, yet there was no woman around the governance table of the game. And so it was the start of bringing some parity and some respect to women as governors of the game and as people who could help shape the game. And so by the time I got into that room, women around the country had determined, who had been playing the game, advocating for their own game, that finally a woman was in that room, in the main board. And so they came to me in big numbers through a number of women to say, really, we need you to be our advocate at the board table. And we want to take you to women's games, show you the women's leagues all around the country, show you how long we've been wanting this. And if there's a mental health story to this, these were women who would thrive and feel their full selves if they'd had the same respect paid to them that the men had in the AFL men's competition. And so it did take a number of years, but we created a network of people to advocate, and then we made the business case for why there had to be an AFLW that sits right alongside AFL men's, and that the clubs would all embrace and treat with the same respect they had with the men's sport. So it's been thrilling. It's been, I now see women who had to, we called it cross-coding. If they'd played as a little girl, got to an age where there was no women's future, then they had to go off and play other sports, and they'd played netball and basketball, often on the world stage, before we were able to get the AFL women's up. So I think it's an outlet now for all women to know they're equal in the game, that they're respected as athletes. It's a very physically demanding game. It's a tough game. The women play an uncompromising tough game. It's not soft. It's just as exciting, and sometimes it's more exciting in a different way to see the women play at community grounds all around the country at the moment. And so I see families coming along, bringing girls and boys, and suddenly there's no debate about whether the girl or boy can play or who they're backing. So I think it's done an enormous amount to sort of reposition Aussie rules. But women's sport is doing that in soccer, rugby league, rugby union, cricket. The women's international, our cricket side is our single most successful international team of all time, and plays with a sort of a joy and values, and never mucks up, and they win. And so I think the rise of women's sport has been great for the general mental wealth of Australia, because everyone now is invited, and there's more work to be done. But I couldn't be more proud of the women who pushed really hard and stayed the course over decades to get the game up.
And those barriers hopefully will be broken down in the future. And like you've only got to see now with the attendance of crowds that the girls are filling stadiums now. Like that years ago it was few and far between, but now Australia is invested in our women's, sportsmen. They are, and you've only got to look at the Winter Olympic Games with gold medals. That one of the most successful is now a female that is a dual Olympian. Like that, that's amazing,
incredible. And just last week, or just over the weekend, I went to see the Matildas play the Republic of Korea here in Sydney. 64,000 people, biggest single crowd ever for the women's game.
Fantastic.
Soccer. So, and you can feel it. And we weren't there just watching women's soccer. We were watching a great game of soccer, and men who followed soccer were there as alive to this as women. And fortunately, we got a draw, which was good.
Yes,
but it is. All these things matter about people being treated with respect, given their own pathways, and not excluded. Because I think exclusion and disconnection is often one of the precursors to a sense of mental health crises. And being part of a community, knowing that there's people who've got your back, knowing there's people you can share with, all these things are simple things. But if you don't have it in your life, if you lack connection, lack a sense of engagement with other human beings, you're lonely. We know that's one of the pathways to very poor mental health.
Exactly. And so we've got to the path of now where we currently sit in Kirribilli House. So did you ever imagine that when you were a little girl that you would one day serve as Governor-General of Australia? And how did this come about?
Well, no, of course not. No, it was not on my bingo card. It wasn't on my thoughts as what I might do with my career. It was the most surprising, shocking request ever made of me by anyone when the Prime Minister asked me if I would serve. Pretty surprising for my dad too, because in addition to being the Governor-General, this role comes with the title of Commander-in-Chief of the Australian Defence Force. And so my dad, having been a soldier in the Signals Corps, I think he was very happy about Governor-General, but a woman Commander-in-Chief, we have to rethink that. Of course, he's very, very proud and understands that role is not, I don't get to command in that sense, but I'm a very big advocate for the Defence Force in this role. I didn't ever imagine it. And of course, it's not a job you can apply for. It's the job that the Prime Minister of the day, as one Governor-General is coming up towards the end of their time, then whoever's in office as Prime Minister starts to think about who they want to serve. And there's no process. There's no, if he doesn't want, he doesn't have to tell anyone who he's thinking about. And he kept it very quiet and very tight in relation to my appointment. And of course, once he's made a decision, I was vetted by Prime Minister and Cabinet and made sure there was nothing that in my past or anything that would make this a vulnerable position for anybody. But it reminded me of the call I got to join the AFL Commission back in 2005. You sometimes can be completely thrown by the leadership positions offered. And I've always thought about these things. You don't just simply say yes and hope for the best. You have to interrogate your own motives, interrogate your own values. What does this mean? Why me in this job? How would I conduct myself? Can I do it? what will be the impact on my family? I have a lovely husband of almost 30 years and a 26-year-old daughter. And my first thought was, what will this mean for them? Can we do this as a family? Because if we couldn't, it would have been an easy no. So we had that conversation. We've tried to do it in a very modern way, which the Prime Minister asked me to. But he said, I want the role modernised, highly visible and optimistic. And I want people to know how our system of democracy works. I want them to see it in action. And so he raised the issues of sport, mental health, young people. He said, I want someone who can take this role across the country to people of all backgrounds. My growing up in a military family helps, not just with the Commander-in-Chief, but I spent a lot of time in defence establishments with young defence personnel, on defence craft, supporting veterans. I spent a lot of time with families of veterans and a lot of the organisations that have been created that provides support for veterans who have mental health issues and in all forms. And I've formed very deep relationships with all of those advocates. And so when I saw the range of things the role could do, and he'd asked me to be a modern Governor-General, my family were okay about it. So 18 months later, here we are sitting in an Admiralty House in Sydney.
I know.
In a place I used to come to as a guest of Governors-General, and still pinching myself every day.
You're pinching yourself. I'm pinching myself sitting across from you. So that makes two of us. And so for the everyday Australian out there, Governor-General, what is your role? What do you do?
So this is part of what I've been trying to do in making the role very visible, because they've been governor. I'm 28th Governor-General, so we've had them for a long time. I'm the second woman to perform this role. Dame Quentin Bryce, who was the Governor of Queensland, was the first some years ago. The job has been held by former chiefs of defence, former High Court judges, former governors, many different people. I'm probably in a modern time the first sort of general civilian who comes from a very broad base without that institutional backing to do the role. And I guess that speaks to why the role is important for ordinary Australians. So the Governor-General is the one part of our parliamentary constitutional monarchy that has no politics, no policies, and I have no money to grant. So I have many, many wonderful opportunities and privileges, but I'm above politics. I don't issue policies, I don't comment on policies, and I don't have any money to give to communities. I have 4 C's that define who I am. So my roles are defined by the Constitution. I have a very strong ceremonial role. I'm Commander-in-Chief, and the biggest part of my role is community. So within all of that, under the Constitution, I exercise the powers of the Crown in Australia through the Constitution as directed by the government of the day. So the executive, through the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, ministers, they advise and guide me in the things I must do when I sign off on legislation, when I look at regulations and appointments. I do that on the instruction of the government of the day. As Governor-General, in the community space, I'm then the person that, as Sir Zelman Cowen, who was a Governor-General many years ago, used to say, that the role is to help the country interpret itself, understand itself, and to reflect the light and shade of the country back to the country wherever I can. So I travel a lot. I travel to places Governors-Generals don't typically go. I go to remote communities, outer suburbs. I've been all over. I've been around the country twice, and I'll do that every year to different places. I'm just back from Cloncurry and Mount Isa and Darwin, and I'm off to the APY land soon. But I've spent time in all states and territories. And when I go to see things, to observe and see what's the very best of what's happening in the country. And I often go to places that have just been through the worst, whether it's floods, fires, storms, people who've lost everything. I show up on the advice generally of local government. And I say, when do you want me to come in? Because when I turn up, it's a bit of a deal. And so I don't want to disturb people when they're in their most difficult. But I often go to places where people are in recovery. And when I went to Lismore after multiple floods that had devastated that community, I remember speaking to the local council and saying, how do you want me to reflect on this visit when I talk to the rest of Australia? And they said, perhaps you don't get to use the word resilient. Perhaps the best word you could use is we're in recovery, because we'll work out when we're resilient, but we're in recovery, and recovery is different. And in recovery, we need people to know that they need to keep wrapping their arms around us and not forget about us. And there are hundreds of communities around Australia today that are in recovery, still after COVID, after major car accidents that have taken out family groups that were important to a community, where they've had tragedies, loss of the beaches, the shark attack, all those things. And then, of course, it brings you to Bondi. and to a heinous anti-Semitic attack. And the crisis for those first responders. I spend a lot of time with first responders wherever I go. I always seek out the fireys and the SES teams and volunteers and reservists, and I spend a lot of time with defence people back from when they're back from wherever they've been deployed. Whether they've retired. I see a lot of them at the War Memorial, at last post ceremonies, RSL clubs, and it's trying to gather the stories and the care for everyone who's done it a bit tough, and to then offer them a sense of thanks and that, I hope you're going to be okay and I'm here for you, and then tell that story to the rest of the country. That's a big part of the Governor-General's role, because I'm not doing it to win votes. I'm not doing it because I've got to make a grant or that I'm trying to design policy. I'm doing it because I'm representing all Australians in that moment to say we deeply care about what's going on here, and we're going to share that and learn from it. And that's that interpreting back to the country, I think, to the country go, when things are bad, maybe we've got an optimistic path out. We've still got good things to think about. We're still a great country. And it's almost my job, going back to the constitutional function, to wherever I go to explain why our democracy is so strong. Compulsory voting, independent electoral commissioner. We've got great education systems, great health systems. And under that is our constitution and governments and parliaments that are elected by the people. We are becoming rarer and rarer in the world as a strong constitutional democracy that respects the will of the people. And I say to people all the time, don't forget that. Don't forget what an incredible place we are. That's part of the job for the Governor-General, is to keep reminding us that our system is incredibly strong, something we should be proud of.
Absolutely. And I remember when you came to the Mid-North Coast last year with the floods, when I was personally impacted and personally out there cleaning up with the fireys, and the sense on the streets was, wow, what the Governor-General's actually, she cares. She's here. She's on the ground. She's not, she's actually seeing what we've gone through. And so from us up there, it was really appreciated, you actually coming up and spending time on the ground. And it was, like poor Taree just absolutely got.
The Taree visit was both heartbreaking and incredibly uplifting. But the sense of community in Taree, but the extent of what everyone was coping with, loss over loss, and people who'd lost their entire homes, their entire livelihood, and just what was the future going to hold. Taree was very difficult, but I did see the very best of community.
Of course.
And I always check before I come that the first wave of people have come through, the first responders, the politicians with the money, the helping local government do rebuilds and recovery. So I come in at a point to say, now, what else do we do? And let you know we're still paying attention, and invite me back, and let me come and do things with you when you're feeling like you are into a more resilient phase. And I think it's a really important role. It's one of the most precious and privileged of mine, to be with communities in those moments, and just simply, sometimes it's a big hug. Often it's just thank you. And particularly for the first responders, I met some of the chaplains of first responders in that visit, and asked what were they doing, and they have peer support for one another as well. So it's like, great, you do know this is hard on everybody, but to see it up close and then reflect on it, and then I put that into my speeches. I tell that to other communities and say to all Australian communities, I'm here in an act of care and kindness and respect for everybody, because we are, to hold that great sense of who we are as a nation requires us to pay attention.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that it's meaningful to get out into the communities, but of all your roles as Governor-General, is there one that's more meaningful than the rest?
It's a hard question. Often the children who come through Government House in Canberra, who do the civics tour, it's about 20,000 a year that I get to see and engage with. They ask me the same question: what's the favourite part of your job? And it's hard, because within each of those C's, so the constitutional functions are profound. There is a moment when the legislation comes up from the Parliament that are bills, proposed laws, and they don't become law until I give the effect of the Crown through the Constitution. So as I'm signing bills, I can't change them, but I'm giving effect to everything that's happened in the Parliament to get that bill to be the law of the land. So I never take for granted that moment of signing. I always reflect and say, there's the bill. It was a proposed law when it came into this place. Now it's the law. So that's important, as is all of my ceremonial constitutional. The ceremonial functions are really important. So in the Australian honours system, I'd love to see more first responders and people working in this space that are nominated for the Australian honours system, because to tell the story about honours and why you're honoured is important at every level. But I get, alongside the governors of each of the states, to be the person that invests people with the insignia of their honours. And it could be an Australian honour, it could be a bravery award, it could be the Victoria Cross for Australia, even if it's posthumous. And I'm with people in that moment saying something about an Australian who's been brave, kind, exceptional. They are moments that I treasure, and that when I'm doing that, I say, this is the favourite thing. And then I get out to meet all of our defence personnel, inspecting the fleets, talking to young defence, working with my aides de camp and the teams that support me that come from defence. And I think, wow, this is extraordinary. Here I am in another favourite part of my job. And then the big C is community. And so, as you said, when I was in Taree, most recently in Cloncurry, I'm heading to remote communities soon. When I'm in those communities, just feet in earth with good people, just listening, that's my favourite thing. When I'm seeing kids doing the civics work, that's my favourite thing. So I think other Governors General have said this. For me, every day is Australia Day. Yeah, I get to see so many things. So every day is my favourite day, even when we're doing it really, really tough, because it's about showing up and seeing the best of Australians when we're doing it really tough. I mean, there's nothing like being at a footy ground where we're winning. I love that. I love turning up and seeing a whole crowd of people lifting as one when we're we're representing Australia. I visited the Paralympics in Paris last year, as the year before, as the patron of the Paralympics. To see our Paralympians doing so well, as I've just done again in the Winter Paralympics. We've got our first medal. I couldn't give you a specific, but it's being amongst Australians and celebrating everything.
What's great about our country.
What's great about us, yeah.
So you mentioned you're Commander-in-Chief of the Australian Defence Forces, and you work closely with service members and their families. You recently had the opportunity to go to Gallipoli, and what was that like, going to where I've been to Gallipoli myself? It is a very, very moving place, and I've got a relative that actually lies there in a cemetery. So it's for families, it's a special place, but just to be an Australian is a special place. How do you reflect on service and sacrifice, and on Anzac Day and Remembrance Day with your own family service? How do you reflect on what service is and sacrifice is?
So I've been going to Anzac Day dawn services and parades since I was a little kid, because as a army family, we just, wherever we lived, and it always took different forms. If it was near a beach, it was the local RSL club with just a flag going up, or major cities to the dawn service and then the big parades. And my dad marched in almost all of those while he still had good knees. His knees aren't as good today as a 91-year-old. But I think they are moments of deep reflection on the cost of service and the price of service, but also on the spirit of people who have always stepped up in incredible circumstances, whether it was First World, Second World, Vietnam, the more recent modern theatres of war, Afghanistan, Iraq, and as we're now sending some to the United Arab Emirates as we speak. And I think those that stand up for service in the Defence Force, it is ultimately saying they're doing something for our country that comes with risk and a deep commitment that goes beyond most other jobs. But we then see that in reservists and those that support the Defence Force. So on the days when we reflect on what was lost, they are the most poignant. Sometimes they're very sad in many respects, particularly if you had a family member and you see the headstone, or you've been able to visit a place where they've buried, not been able to come back to Australia. They are somber but poignant, and ultimately for me uplifting, because we've not forgotten. And our Anzac Day ceremonies, our Remembrance Day ceremonies, I think are as strong today as they have ever been in terms of the community support, the respect shown for that moment, and for those that did sacrifice their lives or their physical health or their long-term mental health. And I think that's what we've learned in more recent theatres of war, where younger men have been, that the long tail of service and sacrifice that's in not just body but in mind. And so I think it always reminds me that the work to be done to support those that are still serving and are alive and have had those impacts, that's a very important role for all of us. I had a beautiful juxtaposition of images from being at Gallipoli. So the day before the dawn service, my then aide-de-camp captain, she's our Major Katie Higgins, we went down to Anzac Cove and we stood in the water, got our shoes off and stood in that freezing water, and she dipped her medals as a mark of respect for those that had lost their lives in that place. The next morning, we were there for the commemoration, and I gave the Anzac Day speech on behalf of Australians into that dawn service, but looking out at thousands of people who had travelled from all over the world to camp there overnight. The Princess Royal was there. Yes. Princess Anne was representing the King, and we went through a day of commemorations at all of the sites at Gallipoli. But as I was walking up as the dawn had broken, we were walking up to the start of the services, up on the hill, there were a group of blokes that had the Australian flag, and they all had these beanies on that said Mo Men from Springfield. And I stopped and we had a chat, and they were the Mo Men who support the campaign for men's mental health in Mental Health Month for Men. And they'd raise money to get there and to represent the community of Springfield in Queensland, in Brisbane, because they were there about the sacrifice by others, by current mates, and they turned up, and so we had this long conversation. I said, I must catch up with you when you're back in Australia, and we did most recently at Government House.
I saw that,
Talk about why they care about men's mental health and how they've created a network of men in their own communities to meet regularly and just talk and just be mates with one another. And, that kind of camaraderie that they're exhibiting and mateship in a different world for the strength of their mental health and their communities and their families all comes, and it made sense to them to raise all that money to get there to Anzac Day and do it at Gallipoli.
And that Anzac legend, isn't it? Like
it inspires so much. Yeah. Coda, all of every theatre of war I can think of where there's been Australians does it, whether they're men or women. Many women sacrificed and served in many different parts of defence, but they also sacrificed as wives and mothers and families that supported those that did pay the ultimate sacrifice. But to see all these, it's classically Aussie, I think, to be in a place of deep commemoration and then go, oh, g'day, and there's the Aussie flag, and there's the campaign for men's mental health, and we catch up, a year later to talk about their work and why it matters in the suburb in Brisbane. So, they are very important moments, and this year I'm hoping to actually be at North Bondi RSL if I can make that happen, because in a strange set of circumstances, along with the North Bondi surf lifesavers, the rescues there, the North Bondi RSL were first responders on the 14th of December when that horrendous act occurred at Bondi. And so there you are, people who are supported by the local Bondi community now providing support for the Jewish community. It was it's all been remarkable. And so I think we learn all the time about how everyone gives, and sacrifice and selflessness is often at the core.
Absolutely. And what message would you like veterans and first responders, particularly women veteran and women first responders, to hear from the Office of the Governor-General?
First, it's a thanks. I really think we have to thank first responders in all of their forms. First responders turn up either in a very formal sense, in an ambulance, in a police uniform, as St John Ambulance, at the hospitals, in SES fireys. They turn up in every form, but often they're not wearing a uniform and they're volunteers, and they're playing a role as first responders, and sometimes they're thrown into it without preparation, but turn up. So first of all, I'd say thank you. They are those moments, and particularly for those that do it formally, it repeats over and over, dealing with some of the most difficult moments of people's lives and having to be that person that's caring for them, making sure they're okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I guess, to take care of yourselves and don't be frightened about calling out for help with peer support, colleagues, or the services that are available, because that it's one thing to always be there helping, to think you're strong enough to do it. But I think the absorbing of pain, other people's pain, the absorbing of things no one should ever really see and shouldn't see again and again, does take its toll. So I hope that everyone involved as first responders in whatever form know that it's not weak to say, I've got to have a break, or I need to talk to someone. Reach out to all of the services. I know after Bondi, for all the services, there were new services that were stood up by Lifeline, by Black Dog, that were specific to first responders. Quite different set of circumstances to many others. And tell them that, I would like to say that, what you do is the ultimate act of care for our communities, and it matters. And often people who've been the beneficiary of it talk for years and years but for that person, the care of that person, they wouldn't have got through it, and often they don't know who that person was. So the work is profound. It keeps communities together. It's the ultimate act of kindness and care and respect. And I think it was first responders in COVID when we began to first really identify that carers mattered, that were undervalued, and that's why I put care and kindness and respect at the centre of this office. And I will show up regularly at places where people are ready for me to come and have exactly this conversation to see how people are doing and to say, we see you, care about you, don't be alone. And what you do matters profoundly, but it does sometimes come at a significant cost.
And it is, thank you for that, because it is appreciated. And sometimes Matt as well knows, being a first responder, it can be an unforgiving and a thankless job at times too. So that really means a lot.
Respond? How do you think about what would you want from your Governor General in those moments? Like because it matters to me what it means to a person who is that first responder and who's committed themselves to being there for others, irrespective of the trauma that you might be pulling on.
Oh, it's a can of worms that we could open. For me personally, I would like to see that we understand the role when we sign up, that we are going to face trauma and we're going to be exposed to trauma. We understand that. The thing for myself is similar to like a white card or something that defense members get, that just to help us with some mental, like to go to the psychologist, because that doesn't exist for us. We have to pay for all of that ourselves. So for me, if we could implement a system where we are like a white card, where if we need medication, physio, if we're injured on the job, or a psych, that something state by state, that would be a start for it, because like we understand that veterans, and I absolutely respect every veteran, and my podcast is Veteran and First Responder.
Yeah.
I understand it's federally funded, state by state, it's different, that falls under states, but that's a start. For us, that would be a start, and I think Matt would agree with that just there's nothing for us.
So that's a very good thing for me to learn and to understand. As I said, I don't have the policies or the money, but I do have the ability to observe and to listen and to hear what you've just said and think about what does that mean in my conversations with people who have that power to say, have we thought about how we deal with first responders and that need for support? And if it's a missing piece, then I can say, I understand there are people that can tell you what that is. So thank you for sharing that, because it matters to me to know, because first responders have become such a big part of how we are holding together as a community at the moment. It has always been the case, but we've got more fires, floods, more rescues, more damaging things where we're calling out people all the time. And there's a difference between the volunteers and those that are in service or in our defence forces and police forces. So that's a very good. Thank you for sharing that.
No, you're welcome.
That's very good for me to know.
Well, I figure, I'm with the Governor General.
No, this is exactly. This is what I ask people when I travel. Like, what is it I need to know? So
of course,
that, I can understand what it is you're dealing with and what would help. So thank you.
No, you're welcome. And I can't sit with the Governor General and not talk about leadership. So who do you turn to, both looking in the world leaders and here in Australia, because leadership can be a lonely place? Who do you look to as inspirations? So
I am very fortunate, I think, in the way I was raised, and this idea that no one is more important than anybody. I admire there are certain leaders I really admire on the world stage, and I listen to them. I read voraciously about those that are reconceiving of leadership. And I think, but I don't name anyone in particular for me, other than those that I've worked with or I've aspired to be like my whole career. And I've been fortunate enough to be surrounded by people, often not at the very top, it's people around me, people who worked for me or with me, who were the greatest leaders I could ever be taught by. And so I'm always looking for the elements of people who know what leadership looks like authentically. They don't boast about it. So there's a humility, I think, to good leadership. There's an authenticity. There is a deep vein of care. So I look for leaders where I can identify, do they really care about what it is that they're saying or doing, and how do they show that they care, not just in language, but what is it about them that instills confidence? Because I think most Australians, in the leaders, whoever they are, in whatever field, always respond to people who are honest, authentic, humble, show care and decency, and respect everybody that they deal with. And I conversely, I can always see when leaders fail, when in a split second or a moment they reveal that they don't respect something, or they show some ego that is about the job and their title, not the person. So I look for acts of leadership, and throughout my period as Governor General, I now see that everywhere I go in community. I see local acts of leadership that I try to then say, how could I be better like that? How would I have known how to pick up that level of a community's concern, and how to respond, and how do you give hope without it being Pollyanna? Like, how do you lift people, but do it realistically? How do we speak honestly to people, and how do we cut through division? How do we not lean into my view versus yours? Think, what's the point of connection we could make? And I've learned from so many extraordinary leaders. I've often learned from Aboriginal people about what it means to quietly and actively listen, and not always have the impulse to jump in with a solution, and just reflect on what I'm learning, reflect and think, what is it? Do I have something to add here, or am I really going to rely on someone else's knowledge to do this? So and I think we see the light of leadership emanating from all across our community. You often see it in first responders, who put their own safety as a second to helping others. So I look at people: care, kindness, respect, humility, authenticity, a preparedness to be honest about their own stories, and helping communities be their best selves. It's a kind of, I'm sort of skirting the issue about the people, but and sometimes there are great leaders who do that. I read the great speeches of great leaders over time, but I also try to form a view that leadership today is amongst us and around us, and isn't always positional. And I probably learn more from those at the top, that teach me what does leadership require of you. And when you step into leadership positions, I think it's important to know whether you've got the capability, the resilience, and the capacity to do those jobs, because you're saying something to others when you sit in positions like this. And I think in high public office, that's one of my most important things, is to show that I'm capable, I've got capacity, that I am showing up, and that I'm learning all the time. Of course. Learning from those who've got so much to teach me.
Of course. I've got two final questions before we wrap it up. And it's just, I could sit here all day and talk to you. It's just fascinating. And knowing what you know now and all that you've been through, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self, and would she listen?
Well, to go to your second part, she probably wouldn't listen. What 18-year-old listens to a 60-year-old at this point? Yeah, what would I say to her? I think I'd say, don't try to solve everything early. Don't try to think you've got to solve the world's problems when you're young. Always remain curious. Always be curious and open. Know when to back off. And I'd probably tell her to take better care of her mental health, because when I was an 18-year-old, that was a generation where we just didn't discuss this. If you weren't doing well, you either had to pull your socks up, or get on, and don't cry, there was all that kind of stuff. So I would have lacked all of the language and the capacity to understand for friends I had at the time, and anything I was going through, that actually it would have been better to talk about it, talk things out, and to be available to listen to my mates at the time. I probably wasn't paying attention at that time, and into that years or so post it. And then I probably say, have a lot of fun with your career. Don't let the haters destroy you. Look beyond those that have always got a criticism, particularly the anonymous ones. I get that a lot now. I get people who want to tell me anonymously rather than to my face. And I think we're in a world of social media where I can look through that and know that I can do my job. But I know for a lot of people, men and women, to be slammed online and to be attacked is crushing. But it's often done anonymously. It's done with language I just would never accept, and it would never be the language two people would have if they were sitting down trying to work out their issues. So I'd be saying to her, make sure you can, but never ever treat anyone with disrespect, and enjoy life, and make sure you're surrounded with really good people.
Absolutely.
Choose your partner well. I think I told my agency, I did eventually choose a really great partner that I've been with for 30 years. Choose your partner well. Lifelong partners matter, and always be kind and caring to others, and enjoy this incredible ride that we all get to have.
Absolutely. Well, we only get one shot at life, don't we?
Yep.
So, and one final question: when your tenure ends, how would you hope Australians describe you and your governorship and your contribution to our country?
So I find that a hard question to do, because I don't do any job looking forward to how I will be described afterwards. So I'm not looking for legacy in that sense. If I had a wish, it is that by the time I complete my term, more Australians have confidence in our system. More Australians look to our system of democracy and say, now I understand it better. I'm more curious about it. I'm going to invest in it. I'm going to know why I have a vote. I'm going to understand our history better. I'd hope I would have given people a sense that people in these important public offices do show up with good ethics, with good values, and do care. I guess care, having started with care and kindness and respect, I'd hope that they'd just say that the office itself is in the shape that reflects modern Australia, that does show care, that it's a part of our great system that we can rely on to be there, to do that reflection of who we are, and to always turn up and to say thank you and to share the great Australian story with everyone. I hope that there'd be a sense that we'd made a start on that, and that the office was in great shape, ready for the next Governor-General, because succession really matters to me, and that I'd met as many people as possible who felt that their stories had been heard respectfully, and that I had been learning from Australia through my term. But it's about ultimately what I leave, what the office leaves as something that's it's my response back to Australians who show me such great respect, that we take it seriously and it really matters.
And I think you're doing that by always seeing your posts on Facebook, and you're always engaging. As there was a real mysterious, before you opened up and started to do that, there's now, you can see that, you can see what you're doing, and thank you, because it gives us the Australians to see what you actually do. So thank you.
I'm glad you think that, because when the Prime Minister said modern and visible and optimistic, I thought very seriously about that we can't ask Australians to care about their democracy if they don't know what its features are. We kind of know bits of it, and kids know quite a bit of it at grade 6, but by the time they're in high school, less than 40% of young people understand how our system of democracy actually works. Don't have a clue. Too many other things going on. It's a busy life. And so I want to make this, my part of the system, engaging and interesting, give people a reason to care about our democracy, and say, actually, I care that we've got a constitution, and if we're ever asked to change it, rather than thinking I don't understand it, I'm going to be curious about that, and I want to have a vested interest in our future. And so I try to do as many teaching videos. Whenever communities say, I don't understand what happens on swearing in of prime ministers, or I don't understand that legislation you talk about, we'll put up a post. And so if there is a thing I'd love people to reflect on after 4 or 5 years, it's that, oh, gee, I'm engaged with that, with our system, and I want to know more, and maybe I want to be part of that system, but I'll never take my vote for granted. And I want people in these jobs to be open and helping us know what makes us great.
Well, you are doing it from.
Thank you.
Look at you and the team are doing a great
you're
job.
doing it too. I mean, that's why I love these conversations, because you talk to a part of the community that may not be looking at the post. So it's always about trusting people with the communities that trust you. And on conversations like this, which we've gone much broader than just, of course, mental health and first responders and veterans, but it's about what is the Australian community and what do we expect of each other and how do we show up for each other.
Exactly.
So I want to congratulate you on 150 episodes. So 150 episodes in the 125th year of our federation. And I'm sure you're going to get to your 500th episode.
No, I think 200 is that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think 200 is for me. So 7.5 years.
Wow.
I've decided that I think calling time at 200. So
maybe for the next project after that.
We'll see what comes. Yeah, we'll see what comes.
Well, thank you for what you do, because the podcast is magnificent, and you're speaking to people that really matter and build this country every day. And
thank you. That means a lot.
Make it happy and safe. So
yeah, well,
thank you.
No, thank you. And I think we're short on time, so I think that I just want to thank you so much, and thank your team for allowing us in here today and putting this all together. So, the Governor-General of Australia, Sam Mostyn, AC, thank you very much for your time today.
And you are always welcome.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to True Blue Conversations with your host, Adam Bloom. Real talk with those that pledge to keep us safe with grit, sacrifice, and determination. See you next time.